Hi everyone, my name is Laura Baskall-Smith from SLP Mommy of Apraxia, and I'm so honored and excited that I have with me today Dr. Meghan Overby and Sue Caspari. And if you're not familiar with these two individuals, they recently came out with a paper called Volubility. It's long, but Volubility, Consonant Emergence, and Syllabic Structure in Infants and Toddlers, etc. And basically what it did, though, is it identified red flags that potentially could be for apraxia as infants. So really exciting research, and all the apraxia SLPs were really buzzing about it when it came out. And so I'm just so honored and excited to have you guys here. Dr. Overby, if you could introduce yourself.
Well, it's delightful to be here, Laura. I feel really pleased to have a chance to talk about this research. It just took forever to do, as Sue can attest. I am an associate professor at Duquesne University, and I've been working in the apraxia field, for a long time. I don't know. I've lost track.
You don't have
20,
to disclose it.
20 years maybe. I don't know. I lost it's longer than that, but I think actively, really deeply, probably 20, 25 years.
Thank you so much. Sue?
Yes, thank you so much, Laura. Like Meghan said, it's just so nice to be able to get a chance to talk about the research. You're immersed in it for so long, and then you get published, and then it's just done.
Right, I can imagine. Oh my
so
goodness.
it's a lot of fun. I looked back, Meghan, before tonight at my emails. I searched your name to see when it was that we started this.
Oh,
It was
yeah.
in January of 2012.
Wow.
That was before the pilot started, so a lot.
Yeah.
I have a freeze on you, Sue. Can you say that last thing you just said?
Yep. Can you hear me again?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Anyway, we've known each other for over 7 years now working on this project. I am on the faculty at Temple University, and for 20 plus years I worked in private practice as a speech pathologist working primarily with children with CAS. So thank you.
Okay, yeah. So that actually was going to be one of my questions that I initially was going to ask you, which was how many years were you working on this? Because my very first apraxia conference ever was in 2013. Ashlyn, my daughter, for those of you that don't know, I have a daughter with apraxia as a result of genetic mutation BCL11A. So anyways, before I knew anything about anything, I knew she had apraxia. I'm new to the diagnosis. I go to a apraxia conference, and both of you were talking, and you were talking about these early vegetative, sounds. And
I remember that conference.
Yeah, because it was in Denver, which is where I live. Yes, I felt like it was divinely ordained to come to Denver that year because Ashlyn had just been diagnosed. So yeah, and I remember listening to you guys with such interest. I even wrote a blog post about it, and then so it was a little surprising to see. Then 2019 we finally got the real deal.
Well, actually, what we were talking about in 2013 was some of the original pilot data.
Oh, okay.
And so we had 4 children with CAS and then 2 typically developing kids. And so we published a study in 2015.
Yes.
And we thought, golly, these findings are so compelling. They just say everything that every parent and every clinician has ever said about kids with apraxia. We need to do a bigger study. And of course, we ended up calling it the big study.
That's how we referred to it.
Yes. So as we were writing the one that came out in 2015, we were actually deep in data collection for this study now. So they sort of overlapped.
Okay. Yeah, you know what? I was so interested in it. If you, for those that follow me know this, but essentially I have a master's degree in speech. I was a practicing SLP before my daughter was born, and I worked in the elementary school, so I'd treated 3 kids with apraxia. Thank goodness for the Apraxia Kids website, because no one taught me how to do that in grad school. And so I had all this information from various people that helped me treat them. And I never knew something so simple like, hey, lack of babbling, big red flag for apraxia. Never knew it, never knew it. I have a master's degree and was practicing. Like, it makes me so angry, which is why, and I was told it was so rare. Don't worry, you'll never see it. I was the wrong person to tell that to. So I just, I loved this study because I knew she was quiet and I didn't know why. And I'm a speech therapist and I had all these preconceived notions of, I'm going to have the most precocious, verbally, talkative child. And I did all the language stimulation I could find. I'm doing Hannon, I'm on the floor, I'm with her every night. And like the progress was this minimal. So it was just, yes, that's why I'm really passionate about it. And that's why this study is so important, because early intervention SLPs especially, you can change what you're doing. It doesn't have to be parent education all the time or language stimulation. There are things we can do if we suspect, and have these red flags. So anyway,
yeah.
Thank you. And that's why I really, 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 really love this study.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, Laura. I mean, the thinking, right, for years, there were clinical clinicians saying they saw early signs. There were parents reporting it. And certainly, if it is presumed to be present at birth, it's, a congenital disorder, then you would expect that there would be some differences in those in early development. And Meghan and I independently had that desire to know, can we identify this earlier? Because, right, early intervention is the biggest predictor of success. And if we can identify it earlier, we can treat it earlier. If we can treat it earlier, we can help kids to catch up. So we were very motivated by clinical realities.
Yeah,
I remember,
go ahead.
Well, I remember talking about this with our statistician, and he asked, what do you hope that you'll find out? Just sort of, because he's a statistician, he's not an SLP. And I said, well, it would be really nice if we had some empirical data that indicated that the kids who are later diagnosed with CAS really truly did have some sort of reduced inventory. Maybe by the time they're around 2, when we have more talking. And he said, well, you might be able to get it down lower than that. And I said, oh, I can't. No, I sort of poo-pooed that. And then as we analyzed the data, we found out that, these kids don't have their first consonant until so much later than everybody else. We're looking at what's happening at 8, 9, 10 months for typical kids, and our kids with CAS, they're not doing anything. So what's happening is that we're able to look down at these at the infant level and see, is this child developing normally? And I never thought that would be possible. It sort of seemed like pie in the sky, but I think there's a bit of reality there, and we certainly need a lot more research, but I think these kids are really different from birth.
So what made you guys think of this in the first place? I know you said so that you both were really passionate about it, but how did this occur to you to do this?
Well,
I'll let you take that one, Meghan.
Yeah. Well, I was working with a little girl who was probably about, maybe just going on 3. And I think I'd been working with her since, I don't know, maybe for a good 2 years. And she had just all the classic signs of CAS. And I remember turning to her mom one time when she was in clinic, and I said, oh, I just wish I had a videotape of her when she was a baby, because I bet she was doing that same thing 2.5 years ago. And her mom looked at me and said, are you serious? And I said, well, yeah. And she said, I have videotapes of her entire development. And then it was all the autism literature just kind of went through my head. And I thought, oh my gosh. And it started this conversation with Sue. who has, just so much expertise. And we just started talking about this.
Okay, wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, it was just total happenstance. I mean, you think of the progress that's been made with ASD, and now the
Yeah.
American Association of Pediatrics recommends screening before the age of 2 for
Yes.
kids to check for ASD, and that's because of the intensive early vocalization investigations that have gone on, and they've been able to track the trajectory of development in these high-risk kids for ASD. And why can't we do that for CAS?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, reading this really reminded me of Ashlyn too, because basically everything you guys listed was characteristic of her. I mean, at the time, I didn't know any better. As I just mentioned, I didn't even know lack of babbling was a problem. And so I just thought I had the best, well-behaved baby. Like, she was so quiet. I remember taking her to a friend's, like, mom's funeral, and she was like 9 months old, maybe even a year. And she just sat there, perfectly well-behaved, little angel baby the whole time. And, at the time I was like, oh, like, I have such a good little baby. And now I look back and I ask parents, like, to describe their baby, and if they say they have this perfectly little well-behaved baby that never makes any sounds, it's like, ding ding ding. So
Along those lines, this might be a good time for me to bring up my graphic that I have available if you would like me to, because I think I have one of the tables that was available as a supplement to the online version of our article is I think just speaks volumes by its just by looking at it. So I thought it would be kind of fun to share, and I'll make it big here so we can kind of look at these one at a time. But just to orient you, what we were looking at here is the number of basically different consonants produced in each of, in this case, 5 children who were typically developing speech at different months. So to orient you, this is typically developing participants, and there are 5 of them, number 3, 9, 11, 13, and 24. And these are their months in age, up to 24 months. And for those of you who are not familiar with the study, what we did was had the parents send us home videos of the children between birth and 2 years, and that's how we collected this information. And I forget how many utterances did the students transcribe, Megan?
Oh,
12,000 something?
12,000. Yeah, it's over 12,000. It was a lot.
Wow.
That's why it took so many years.
There was a lot of, but what you're looking at here is these 5 children are typically developing, and you can see even starting at 7 months, they've got consonants in their inventory that we're hearing on the tape. This is just the different consonants. It's not the frequency of each consonant, but just what consonants were we hearing in their utterances. And you can see even by 9 months here, 10 months, 11 months, starts to really fill in, and you can see the variety and the diversity of their consonants. If we compare that to children with speech sound disorder, this is speech sound disorder, not CAS, and I'll try to just bring the 2 of them up here on the screen at the same time. You can see that it looks a little bit different, just in terms of, like, if you step back and look at the volume of consonant, letters on the page, so to speak. And then we scroll over here to the CAS kids, and you'll see that there's quite a difference, right?
Oh, wow. Yep.
In the number of sounds and the diversity of the sounds that we're hearing, even compared with the children with SSD.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Ashlyn had mama, and then she had, a lot of people describe a go-to sound. So a lot of these parents will say their child had a go-to sound, and that was hers. It was a da for everything, a da. And it was like she'd have questions with a da, she'd comment with a da, everything was a da.
Yeah. One of the things that the statistician ended up exploring, and we presented this at ASHA last year, was looking at the problem, so to speak, of the lack of velars. One of the things that jumps out is that the typically developing kids have K and G. So if you look down at the bottom, you can see that K and G kind of appear periodically throughout. Sometimes it's early, sometimes it's late. But for the kids with apraxia, it pretty much never occurs.
Wow.
They just don't do that. There's just one there, number 8,
Right.
who did it. And there's always, an aberration, which actually statistically is good.
Yeah.
You want that kind of variability.
Yeah.
And he looked at that, and he compared it to a lot of the other red flags and concerns that we had with the data. And that lack of being able to say the velar sounds, the K's and G's, was the most significant predictor of who was going to have CAS later on.
And by what month are you saying? You're saying this 24 month, if they don't have it
Yeah.
by 24 months.
Yeah. And Sue can talk a little bit about this too. But both the pilot study that we did and this study came to the same conclusion, that the sounds that the kids preferred seemed to be those in the front of the mouth. They were anterior sounds. So they were M's, they were B's, they were D's, they were either bilabials or maybe alveolars, but you just really didn't get posterior sounds very often.
That's so interesting. I don't see a lot, like I'm looking at the CAS one. I remember Ashlyn did have M and N, but the other one she had was this anomaly of an SH. She could say shoe. Girl loves shoes. It was just so bizarre as a speech therapist. I was like, how are you? But again, I guess.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's also a very front sound as well.
That's true. That's true. That's so interesting.
And so Sue and I talked for quite some time about this very interesting problem that the kids with CAS seem to be having. And we sort of speculated at one point that it seemed like they were really dependent upon the sort of the visual. We're always telling our kids with CAS, look at me, look at my face. And, they're doing a lot of that. And that's why they're getting those particular sounds, the M's, the B's, the alveolars, but those back sounds are really tough. Right,
Yeah.
Sue?
Yeah, I mean, it's speculation, right? But it certainly makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does. That's interesting. I noticed H's here too. And Ash and I, now that I think about it, did have hi. Hi was her first word. It wasn't mama.
How old is she now, Laura?
She is 10 and a half. Yeah, she's doing great now in terms of apraxia. Apraxia is resolved. She has dysarthria, so she's got this floppy tongue, and she's got a lisp and a forward or a tongue thrust. So we're working on that right now. But the apraxia component totally resolved. But well, not totally, but you know what I mean. Resolving.
Right.
Purposes. So. Yeah. Can you tell me something? You guys are talking a lot about consonants, but in your study, one thing that tripped me up was you kept calling them resonant consonants. And so then I'm like, why am I not remembering what resonant consonants are? And then I Google it, and that was no help. And so I talked through it with a few colleagues that helped me understand. But can I hear it from you guys? What is your definition of resonant consonants for the purpose of this study?
You want to take that, Sue?
Sure. In a nutshell, transcribable. So when we're listening to the speech of these very young infants and toddlers, you have vocalizations and you have transcribable sounds, and you have kind of tweeners that are not quite transcribable. And so I think we were looking for a way to define those transcribable consonants. So there are sounds that are produced that have restriction, like a consonantal sound, but that aren't really fully transcribable as an English consonant.
Right. Okay. And then my other question, just for some terminology here, was volubility. I feel like people think they know what that means, but I just want to hear it from you guys. What was volubility defined as for the purpose of this study?
Well, volubility can be measured a lot of different ways. And one of the ways that you can measure this is the frequency of vocalization per unit of time. So it's how talkative are they. And so the frequency, the unit of vocalization can be how many consonants were there per unit of time, how many syllables were there per unit of time. It can be defined all kinds of ways. A common way to talk about volubility is to talk about syllables per unit of time. In this particular study, we did more, we looked at volubility more in terms of the number of consonants per unit of time. But there's another study where we looked at babbling with Katie Bellardi. And in that study, we looked at volubility with syllables per unit of time. We got the same results. It didn't matter. So it just means that these kids, like your daughter, aren't saying much.
Right. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so my other question was, you guys actually, though we're talking a lot about CAS, had two aims of this paper. So one of the aims was clearly, identifying red flags in CAS, but what was your other one?
Well, I mean, I think that was our primary aim, right? Is to look at the developmental characteristics of CAS and really compare that to typically developing children and children with SSD, right? With the idea of if it is congenital, hopefully we would see something in order to use that data clinically to help with early identification. If we can identify children early. And to your point, Laura, of really intervening in those early years to really try to affect a change. I think that's my soapbox, and what has driven me clinically in the field is that, it is evident that early intervention makes the biggest difference. And so why should we wait till a child is 3 to say, oh, now I can say they have CAS and I will treat them?
That's right. Don't even get me started on that 3-year-old number.
So certainly if we can identify it earlier, then hopefully we can advocate to employ more direct therapy early and hopefully affect a change earlier, hopefully catch them up sooner.
Yeah.
Good all the way around.
Because I will tell you, go ahead.
I'll just piggyback on that one of the things that we wanted to do was to include a group of kids with a speech sound disorder that wasn't CAS. Because up until now, there'd been very little published about how kids with articulation problems and phonological problems that aren't CAS, and more what we just call plain old SSD, did.
Mm-hmm.
And so could we distinguish their performance in early development from kids with CAS? Because we were getting all these distinctive differences of kids with CAS, and the reviewers, not only us, but I mean, other people in their papers would get the same feedback. How do you know that kids with a speech sound disorder wouldn't be doing the same thing?
Right.
And so Sue and I really wanted to get that speech sound disorder group. And we found, much to our surprise, that they were a lot more like the typically developing kids than I think either of us, well, at least I expected.
Mm-hmm.
They were like the kids with CAS early in development, but then they improved and they became more like typically developing kids later on in their development.
Right.
So they just sort of rapidly improved over time. whereas the kids with CAS never really changed.
Yeah, it's very compelling. I like this graph too, because it's very compelling to see it kind of side by side. I read it, of course, but yeah, that's so interesting. I guess my other question, we have just, 10 more minutes, so I'm just setting my clock. It goes by so fast, right? Isn't
I
it
know, right?
I'm going to set it to 9 so I don't run out. Okay. Can you give me just a lowdown? We have the velars, like lack of velars as one red flag. We have the limited volubility. Can you list a few others that this study revealed?
One of the things that we found was just less diverse in terms of manner too. So if you
Yes,
think back to those
okay.
charts, the stops and the nasals, so it's not only forward placement, but it's also just the majority of the productions were of stops and nasals. So it's a limited diversity in both place and manner. And late developing, right? It's a later onset as well of the first consonant. I think, let me see, Megan, do you remember when the first resonant consonant after 12 months?
After 12 months, and that was
Think
just the
about that.
average.
Yeah.
Some of them didn't get their first consonant until I think up till 19 months. Now some of them got them really early. That's the problem in identifying kids really early, that they're variable. But the average is still, as Sue said, 12 months compared to when typically developing kids get their first consonant during babbling, which is somewhere around 7, 8 months of age. And even the kids with SSD, they're just a little behind, about 8 months or so. So they're pretty close to the typically developing kids, but the children who go on to have CAS, they're not getting that consonant typically until a couple months afterwards, and it just tends to be this one consonant that they hang on to for a while.
Yeah, Megan, we were talking earlier today, refreshing our memories on all of the details of the study, at least I was. And I remembered we also did an analysis of syllable shapes too, and Megan was reminding me that a lot of the CAS children even had vowel only all the way up to 18 months.
Yeah. Yeah, they just they might do consonant vowel, but they really would prefer vowel. That was a very preferred syllable shape, was just vowel. Just the neutral vowel whereas the typically developing kids are using this incredible diversity. And what we found ultimately when you pull all the data together is that the kids with CAS used all of the same syllable shapes when you pull all the data together, but they hardly use them with the same frequency. You might find one exemplar of a syllable shape in all of the data for a complex syllable shape, whereas you're typically developing kids, you'd have 95% of them using a complex syllable shape. So the preferred shapes were vowel and consonant vowels, and that was pretty much it for the first 2 years. They never got, pretty much all of them, they never got a CVC. They just never got that final consonant on anything.
It's interesting. Ashlyn had one, you could talk about pop-out words too. I know a limitation of the study was you said there could have been periods where maybe, you didn't get all the data on them from that video data, but Ashlyn had one pop-out word, I have it videotaped, where she said burp, and I was like, I thought it was so funny, and like she just popped out with it, and she didn't have B's, and she didn't babble B's, and I recorded it, and she could do it maybe 3 more times, and the next day it was gone. Burp was never to happen again. Yes. And so, I mean, could you really even say that she had a CVC? I mean, I guess if you looked at the video, you could, but that's not really having acquisition of that target.
Exactly the point. Right. Yeah.
So, okay, let me see if I have any more questions for you guys. I'm just so excited that you came on to do this. I really want, my hope is that, SLPs, I think that We get in our jobs. I know this personally. I get in my job. I'm busy. It's really hard to read the research. Research is dense, and so even reading this one, I had to go back and be like, okay, what do they mean by volubility? Okay, what do they mean by resonance? And, it's just nice to have you guys come on, because if you can just talk about it, I feel like people can just kind of take it in and not be as intimidated by it, because this is really important. It really is. I'm not just
I
saying
think it's
that I
so
have you guys on
fabulous.
here.
I think that's so fabulous that you're doing this, working as a clinician for so many years. It's something I would have loved to just have a little synopsis from the researchers.
Yes.
I think one of the things that I would like to say to clarify, people ask us this question a lot is, were the kids in our study diagnosed with their speech sound disorders between birth and 2? And the answer to that is no. What we did was we went and got children between the ages of 3 and, was it 9?
Almost 9,
9.
yeah.
And kind of looked at where their speech system was and made the appropriate diagnoses, and then obtained the videotapes from families from those same children when they were birthed to 2 to be able to look at their sound development. So it was a brilliant idea that Meghan had, to really look at it that way, because then you can feel confident with the diagnosis, because they're at an age where you feel like you can analyze it in a way that
Well, and I want to encourage the SLPs out there to do research, and it is possible to do. You need to partner with someone to get an IRB, Institutional Review Board, permission at a university, but there is a lot that can be done. We need desperately information from parents, retrospective data. So Laura, you're a terrific example of a parent where we could mine your data, mine your experiences for what your daughter was like as an infant. And if we get a big enough sample of those experiences, that's very valuable data about what her social skills were like, what her feeding skills were like, what her fine motor skills were like. I mean, there's so many things we don't know, and clinicians can do this, and we desperately need it. We need a whole trajectory of what's happening in a child's life.
Yeah, thank you, Meghan. That is so awesome that you put that out there. I think a frustration a lot of parents have, especially with someone like Ashlyn, is for the intensive research purposes, when research has to be really, you're trying to avoid all the different variables. People like my daughter don't usually get put into that because they have all these other comorbidities. So they're like, in order to get a really accurate information on just apraxia right now, we need kids with like basically just apraxia right now. So parents are always like, why don't they include other kids like my daughter? And it's like, we're getting there. We're getting there. It's not how research works, though.
Yeah, but I think we are at the point where we could start to do that kind of research.
Yeah, that's awesome to know. That's so great, because I wrote an article that's pretty popular that is in circulation, which was apraxia is usually a symptom to a bigger problem, and it sucks, and it's not a popular opinion. It doesn't have to be a popular opinion. Unfortunately, it is. It's true. We rarely just have a person with solely childhood apraxia of speech. So, unfortunately.
Did you see Ruth Steckel and Becky Boss's presentations at ASHA past couple of years, where they looked at a cohort over a 15-year period at Mayo Clinic to look at comorbidities? If you haven't seen it, you should talk to Ruth about it. Do an interview of Ruth and Becky. They didn't publish it, or maybe they did, but it's really interesting.
Oh, I will. No, I've seen Ruth talk. I like to talk that she had like, it was like ABC Soup or something of apraxia, like with like other diagnoses. I can't remember what her cute title was, but anyway, I have to cut this short. Thank you, Dr. Overby. Thank you, Sue, for coming on and explaining this paper.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone. I'm sure that you can, if you have any questions, please feel free to DM me, and I can do my best to try and answer your questions and get a hold of these two ladies. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Laura.
Bye.